Meantime, the IRS is putting some new rules on hold. They were designed to rein in political activity by tax-exempt groups. Now, some Republicans say the proposals are attacks on free speech and are meant to silence conservatives. So is the agency's delay in imposing the rules a victory for the GOP? Let's talk about it with Jonah Goldberg, editor-at-large with National Review Online and a Fox News contributor. David Hawkins is senior editor for Roll Call. Gentlemen, thanks for being with us. David, you had, I think, a pretty good explanation, a quick explanation as to what the IRS is trying to decide here, the difference between advocacy and politics. Can you share that with our viewers?
Sure. So the issue here is not stopping nonprofit groups from speaking out on matters of politics or matters of public policy. It's trying to decide when does advocating for a policy point of view bleed over into politics. In other words, a pro-business group could say, as a matter of advocacy, send a message to Washington to stop waging a war on coal. That would be clearly advocacy. Clearly politics would be vote for Mitch McConnell for the Senate in Kentucky. He'll defeat Obama's war on coal. But there's a lot of gray area in between. And the question is, where is that gray area? Because if it's on the political side, then these nonprofit groups will have to disclose their donors. And that most nonprofit groups think is a bad idea that will cut into their donor base.
You said, Jonah, that you think this is a victory of sorts for the GOP. Why?
Well, it's a victory of sorts because I think that there's a lot of pressure coming from Senator Schumer and from other liberal Democrats who very much wanted to focus on Republican-leaning or pro-market conservative groups. That's, I think, in some ways how the IRS scandal came to be. And the IRS was trying to come up with some neutral rules about how to effectuate that policy desire. And it turns out that you can't do it. And so I think it's a victory of sorts insofar as this would have been bad, I think, for free speech. I think it would have been bad for our democracy, but it would have been particularly bad for conservative groups whose message, obviously, I more agree with. My problem with celebrating it too much is that it's only a delay. And I think that conservatives set the bar kind of low when they celebrate as a big victory a delay in getting essentially shafted by the federal government.
David, is it more of a benefit to conservative and Republican groups in your view?
Well, it is true that Republicans in the last couple of election cycles have benefited, their causes have benefited more from this kind of spending. But there were more than 150,000 comments that were sent to the IRS to try and get them to alter or delay these rules, which has now happened. And it seemed pretty well split between advocates on the conservative side and advocates on the liberal side, and the email inbox of our newsroom was flooded with plenty of comments from the liberal side of the ledger yesterday, saying they were thrilled that this had been delayed. They didn't think these were good idea rules either.
Well, Jonah, if Chuck Schumer is so interested in cracking down on, the input of conservative and Tea Party groups and so forth, does he not see that there might come a time when the IRS would be cracking down on liberal groups in just the same way?
Yeah, out of interest to my sanity and my eternal soul, I try not to get too deeply inside the head of Chuck Schumer, so I can't speak to what he thinks or believes. But let me just say, look, I think David's analysis of this is exactly right, but it shows you the insanity of where we are as a country, that we have the federal government, particularly the tax collecting arm of the federal government, getting into the nitty-gritty granular level of deciding whose political speech is legitimate and whose isn't. This is the kind of through the looking glass problem you get when the federal government gets in the business of regulating our First Amendment speech freedoms, which were, the political speech was what the First Amendment was about. I think it should be out of this business entirely. And I'm glad that the left, if not Chuck Schumer, then certainly the left, the ACLU, and lots of those kind of groups understand that you can't get into this game without suppressing speech of a lot of groups that they like.
Jonah Goldberg and David Hawkins, some interesting thoughts there. Thank you both.